Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Mathias, and this is the State of the Market for Property Lawyers, episode 5. And in our mid-month session, we don't actually look at the statistics, we interview somebody who's had a lot of experience in the property market and can give you the wisdom of their years. And today I am absolutely delighted to welcome along Richard Powell, who is the former director and owner of Ryder Dutton estate agents, who are a 26 branch estate agent. Was that about right, Richard? In Greater Manchester and
24. Good morning, everybody. 24
branch estate agent in West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester, and has had approximately 40 years experience of the property market and has seen many of the ups and downs, the crashes and the booms. And we're here today to pick his brains and look at what experience he has had and how it can affect today's market and help conveyancers and estate agents nationwide on what to expect in the coming months and how he's reacted in the past and how you could possibly react in the future. So welcome, Richard. Richard is currently still working a little bit. Tell the people what you do, Rich.
So I've been an RICS member for many years, and I sit on the panels that assess potential chartered surveyors. I observe the panels that are doing the assessing. I deal with the appeals for them as well, and I'm also a member of the advisory council for the property redress scheme, one of the two ombudsman schemes.
Very good. And in all your days as an estate agent, and you'll have seen lots and lots of changes in the market, ups and downs, as I discussed. And at the moment, if you watched the show 2 weeks ago, and with the data from 20EA and Chris Watkin, we're seeing quite a boom in the market. And I think most of the lawyers who will be watching today are starting to feel the pressure a little bit again, because volumes are up, sales agreed probably up 10-15% on last year, and new properties coming to the market seem to be up about 20%. But we don't seem to be seeing any signs of the much vaunted crash in prices that were put about in the middle of last year. So what's your take on all of this at the moment, Rich?
Well, the first thing I would say that it's almost impossible for there to be a crash in prices when there are not very many properties for sale. And after the hiatus, after lockdown and so forth, and the boom after that, most estate agents' offices have got down to the point where they had less properties actually available on their books at any time since, well, in my estimate, any time since 1988. That was the last time I remember there being so few properties for sale. And when there's nothing for sale, prices don't fall. Prices tend to fall when there's an oversupply of property and no demand. And you could argue that demand has been reduced, interest rates have gone up and so forth, but the supply of properties available has still been relatively small in historic terms. And therefore, it's no surprise to me that the market seems to be moving along quite nicely at the moment. Estate agents' offices have probably got twice as much stock as they had 18 months ago, but in historic terms, that's probably still maybe only half as much as they would normally have had on average over the period. Obviously, agents are listing more properties. Stock is rising now, but that needed to happen to create a more balanced market. And I think what that means is more stock means slightly slower property sales, perhaps, but not necessarily less sales overall. There are more properties for sale, they're just all taking a bit longer to sell.
Taking a bit longer.
A bit longer.
That's an interesting point, that they're taking a little bit more time to sell. What's your take on that? At the moment, the statistics show that the time to sell between SSTC and completion has come down a little bit from a high of maybe 121 days. We're now down to 111 days, which is 16 weeks or thereabouts. But you see an awful lot of commentary that Oh, back in my day when things were easier, it was we'd get these things through in 8 to 10 weeks. So things have got longer. What do you put that down to, Rich?
Um, I think there's a lot of different things have come to play. I think sorting out the financial side of things can take a bit longer now, but for many years as an estate agent, we would have expected our pipeline to turn over in 3 months, 12 weeks. Average time from agreeing a sale to completion would be 12 weeks, and that extended out to double that amount. I think largely due to a sort of slightly unexpected surge in sales and lack of capacity in the conveyancing market. So I go all the way back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, and the volumes of transactions have never been like that since. So lots and lots of capacity came out of the conveyancing market after the crash in 1988.
Yeah. So what you mean is solicitors left conveyancers after the crash just couldn't find jobs and therefore went and did other things.
No,
And
they
to
went and did other things.
build that body of conveyancing professionals up took a long time and hasn't really been an attractive proposition for many lawyers, has it? So we're just basically short of conveyancers.
Yes, and there's been no need to rush to replace all the conveyancers because the overall volume of transactions has never been anything like it was in earlier years. I mean, if you go back to sort of 2006, 2007, I suppose, and 2006-7 wasn't like 1988 because there were still quite a lot of properties for sale. But the volumes then were 1.2 million transactions in a year or whatever, whereas we've been down at 750 or 800,000, and for the best part of 15 years we've never really recovered. And I think Rightmove was saying just this last week that they think that there might be 1.1 million transactions this year.
Yeah, and that's would be.
And in my mind, that's relatively normal. We just haven't seen much of that sort of normal in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the last 10 or 15 years has been particularly normal.
Well, it hasn't, has it? I mean, we've had abnormal interest rates of 0 or 0.5% for 10 years, which has set expectations amongst the home buying public. That's a normal interest rate. For those of us with a longer time frame, it's nothing like normal, is it?
No, but I think that the market's beginning to get used to the current levels of interest rates, and historically these rates are not high.
No. So if you had a little crystal ball and you're looking ahead for the next 6-12 months, what would you expect to happen in terms of numbers of transactions, and assuming no geopolitical bombshells, no more wars or COVIDs?
Well, with no more wars, no more COVIDs, we've probably got a general election to come, although I think that to some degree the market's adjusting itself to what's going to happen with the election already, because I think everybody's fairly content about what's likely to be the outcome of that. But I just think that the number of people wanting to sell will continue to increase. The amount of stock on the market will continue to go up. The length of time it takes to sell a house might just extend out a little bit. But as I was saying before, that doesn't necessarily mean to say that there are less sales. I mean, if we go back to the sort of boom that we had after lockdown, our business was selling everything it listed almost immediately.
Yeah.
Now, it's not normal, not that estate agents necessarily want to admit this always, but it's not normal to sell 100% of what you list. If you sell 70% of what you list on average over a period of time, that's probably about the mark. And I think that we're more likely to return to that sort of thing. So an agent will sell 70% of what it lists. It'll still achieve a decent number of sales per month, but there'll be one or two that they don't sell and a few that take a bit longer.
Yeah. So one of the complaints we often hear from the legal fraternity is that you can't understand why estate agents get fees of 1-2%, which can be £2,000, £3,000, £4,000, and they're operating at figures which until recently were probably averaging £500 or £600, probably more like £1,000 these days. But there's a big disparity between the two. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're making a load more money, does it, Rich?
It doesn't. No. The costs of estate agency have risen really quite a lot. And the things like the cost of advertising on portals, for example, Rightmove is a very large expense to all agencies now, and something which by and large you can't manage without. You probably manage without Rightmove, but you can't manage without any portals at all. So there are lots of costs there. Staff costs rise, of course, but there's a lot of expense needs to go into marketing. You need to employ a lot of people. You've got to show people around houses, so that the costs are high. And despite what lawyers may think, estate agency is not as profitable as everybody thinks it is.
No.
And not as profitable as it used to be 20 or 30 years ago in real terms either.
Yeah. And of course, most agents, it's very much the case, you operate on a no sale, no fee basis, and that makes life even trickier when the transaction times are going out and you're only turning over your property once every 16 weeks, not every 12 weeks.
That's true. And if you think that in difficult market periods we've been to the point where we've only been selling 50% of what we list, but we still have all the cost involved with the other 50% that we don't sell. The business about the time it takes to turn over the pipeline is really important for agents, because when the market improves, when there's more people wanting to sell, you quite like to employ more staff. But if all the properties that you've sold are still in the pipeline and you've not been paid for them, you've not got the money. Yeah. And I know at Ryder Dutton, we were in a situation where there was twice as much money stuck in our pipeline as we would normally have had. And, you're talking about millions of pounds really that, you're due to be paid, but you haven't been paid yet. And It does create some big cash flow issues.
Okay. So just talking about Ryder and Dutton, and when I first met you, which was 21 years ago, believe it or not, two Yorkshiremen still going at it, Hammer and Tom, a bit like Root and Bairstow at the crease, really, now, sticking in there forever. Or Root and Brook, we should say now. Why did Ryder and Dutton adopt the solution it did, choosing Minerva LFS as a solution to help manage a panel of local lawyers? You didn't go down the route of going to the conveyancing factories, but you wanted to control the market a bit more than you had done in the past. So could you explain to our viewers why you felt that was the right solution for you at that time, and still today, really?
We came from a situation where we were just watching what some of the larger businesses were doing, Halifax Property Services at the time, and looking at how they were managing to generate an income stream from conveyancing. But we didn't want to fall out with all the local people that we've been working with for years. We were a multidisciplinary practice, so survey work and commercial work and so forth, which those lawyers could still provide to us. So we wanted to maintain those local ties. We didn't feel comfortable trying to refer lots of work outside the local area. We couldn't see how that was going to be good for the local economy and so forth. And we, I think we were of the view that if we wanted to refer our clients to law firms, we wanted to know in a bit more detail who we were referring them to, know a little bit about the businesses, what we could expect from them, what we could expect them to do. We wanted to be able to have, I wanted to have a relationship with the people that were running those businesses where I could just ring them up and have a natter with them about things and, you know, sort anything out that was necessary. And also we had a situation where we were not using anybody external to do any of the selling of conveyancing. So our estate agency staff were the ones who were talking to the potential clients about referring things, and our staff were much happier referring things locally, and the clients were much happier being referred to people locally that they'd heard of. I think that where I used to look at it was that clients used to think that they might need to go and see the solicitor, and I know that they very rarely go in the solicitors' offices nowadays.
But it gave them that
the way it
comfort.
seemed to work was that you know, they preferred it to be somebody local because they could go and see them if they needed to, and they felt a lot more comfortable with that. So it was easier for us to recommend local firms like that. You know, the clients didn't object to that.
And over that 20-year period when you ran that scheme, what were what did you see as the major benefits? Obviously, it wasn't always perfect. Some of the local law firms let you down from time to time, and you came under some pressure from some of the factories and that to switch. But you didn't. You resisted that and stuck with those local lawyers, even though not all the time you got the greatest of service. It was mix and match, wasn't
it? It was, but I think my view was that, you know, everybody has different pressures in businesses from time to time, and I think that what we were looking for was a relationship with the lawyers that we work with, where we supported each other. And
the word collaborative comes to mind, which is if you listen to today's Conveyancing Association and Home Buying and Selling Group and others, collaboration between agent and lawyer is absolutely key. So that's part of the remit that you were operating then, wasn't it?
It is key. And so it was, for me, it was about the relationships with the people that were running the law firms or the partners that were running the conveyancing departments, where we could have a chat about how things were, you know, and if it was a bit like going to see the lawyer if you needed to. So we had the opportunity, the lines of communication were open, so that if things weren't going quite so well, it was dead easy for me to pick up the phone and have a natter with whoever was in charge of what was going on at the law firms. And similarly, sometimes they might want to speak to me. They would speak to me occasionally about, could I stop my negotiators ringing their conveyancing people sort of every 5 minutes of every day about a different matter? You know, and so we could work together and sort that sort of stuff out, really, and it was a lot more comfortable, sort of.
And you can turn the tap off. If lawyers felt brave enough and they had too much work, or people on maternity or going off sick or whatever, then they could actually turn the flow of work off, which would have an effect down the line, not immediate, but that would help as well, wouldn't it?
No, we used to have conversations with them where, you know, they would say, you know, because we had, in the first instance, we tried to agree with them the sort of volume that we would send them each month on average, and sometimes that was a bit much for them. Some, you know, occasionally, and they might say, well, could you just sort of not send us anything for a week or so while we catch up or whatever, and it worked really well.
Okay. Again, just reading some of the things you read on LinkedIn today, which can be a bit of an echo chamber of people having a moan, but there certainly seems to be things haven't changed in terms of the perception of lawyers by agents and vice versa, and there's almost a dislike at times between some of the more traditional lawyers and the estate agency community, and I know there's a lot of frustration amongst estate agents and negotiators at how they're treated by some of the lawyers. What's your view on why that persists and what can be done about it?
Well, I think unfortunately some of the sort of more old-fashioned, less commercial.
Be careful,
lawyers,
there's me and you. Me in my 50s, you in your 60s, fella. How old's old?
I know, but somehow, if I say I think that some of the lawyers thought that they were a notch up the ladder from the estate agents, and I understand why they might think that about some of the estate agents, because I always considered to be a notch up the ladder to some of my competitors. We were professional estate agents. I'm a chartered surveyor. We've got lots of qualifications other people haven't. But I think that there was a time where the lawyers looked down on the estate agents a little bit, and what they didn't like was us coming to the conclusion, and I mean, I learnt this almost by accident, that we had, as agents, had so much control over where people went to have their conveyancing work done. We used to send a few jobs to people on the old boys network, if you like, and we used to get a few jobs back from lawyers and so forth. But when we set ourselves up to actually try and make referrals formally, it then dawned on us that we could refer almost everybody that came to us to a lawyer, and they would accept those recommendations.
So very little loyalty to a law firm that you've used 10 years ago. It's almost non-existent these days, isn't it?
It is. Lawyers used to say, "Oh, so and so's my client." Say, "Well, no, hang on a minute. You acted for them 10 years ago, but that doesn't mean to say they're going to choose you again today." And we did cause a bit of trouble by, some law firms deemed people to be their clients, and we recommended other law firms, and people went elsewhere. But the clients were happy. The clients were happy with this. But I mean, when we started to make referrals, I don't know how many I thought we would make, but in no time at all, we were making hundreds and hundreds every month, from nothing. And that meant that we had a great deal of control, and the lawyers definitely didn't like that. When we set up our panel in the first place, we went to all the lawyers that we'd worked with over the years, and half of them agreed that they would want to be on our panel, and half of them said, "Oh no, we don't. We don't want to be involved." So we then, unfortunately, if you like, sent a lot of the people who didn't want to be involved. We sent their clients to people who did want to be involved.
Yeah, that's just nature of the world, isn't it? Commerciality, and everyone's got free will. The lawyers had a choice not to come on your panel, and some did, and those that did very well out of it, and still do very well out of these sorts of schemes. So let's fast forward a little bit from what you were doing to 2018-19, where you and I sat at many a test match at Headingley discussing the state of the market and what we were going to be doing and things. And you had a big thing at that time about duplication of effort and upfront information at that stage, which is coming back to haunt us all today. And by 2019, 2020, we were on the cusp of launching a contract ready scheme. I don't know where we got that idea from. I'll give it a name check now. Karen James, if you're out there somewhere, that was your little scheme, wasn't it? But could you explain to the viewers this is before Home Buying and Selling Group got hold of this particular model. This is before the Law Society brought out its TA6 Part 5. This is 2017-18 when we were thinking about it, 2019 when we were about to introduce it.
So there were lots of things that came together that made us want to be involved in this. Firstly, we, as professional estate agents, wanted to comply with all the regulations. So we were needing to comply with anti-money laundering regulations, also with consumer protection regulations at that time, and we wanted to do it properly. And sadly, lots of agents didn't, still don't. I mean, you'd probably see the list of fines from HMRC that was published a couple of weeks ago, and there were one or two quite well-known names on there fined quite a lot of money. So I didn't want that. And good old David Beaumont, you remember him?
Oh yeah, the compliance chap.
He gave us quite a lot of good advice about what we should do and what might happen to us if we didn't, and frightened us a bit, as compliance people always do. So we wanted to deal with that, but at the same time, I saw it as an opportunity to improve the process for consumers. And one of the things I wanted to do was to change the way that we provided information to people. So estate agents have always produced particulars with, very nicely written descriptions of properties, which I came to the conclusion that nobody read anymore. So what I wanted to do was to be able to provide people with lots of decent photographs of properties, and then all the other important information that I thought that they really wanted to know. So things like broadband speeds, what are the local schools like, does it flood, things like that, because I thought that was what people really wanted to know, and this was getting to the nub of, the CPR stuff. But in order to do that, I had to be able to get all that information before I could give it out. So we had people filling in property information questionnaires. We used to send those out, and we also invested in Sprift, which was new technology at that time. Which
I'm sure you'll like the name check. Still out there pushing his way.
Well, it was, they were the first people to do it, and we jumped on that fairly quickly, and they provided us lots of information. So what that meant was that we had the information that consumers wanted. So we thought that we could make ourselves better and gain a competitive edge by having a reputation for being able to provide people with the information they wanted, and understanding it might take a while, but if we deal with somebody who wants to buy a house really well, we've got all the information that they want when they view it, then that sets us up in a good place.
Less chance of it falling through, I suppose, if they know what they're buying and they can see that it's connected to water, so the water mains rather than to a cesspit or whatever. Then there's less shocks coming down the line, which is what a lot of the upfront information stuff is now about, isn't it?
To avoid shocks down the line was good, and you don't necessarily get that many shocks down the line. The main reason sales fall through is because people change their minds. But you do get a few things that cause problems. But it was this sort of extra information. Go back to the day when agents couldn't even be bothered to find out what the council tax was or what the tenure was, and particulars also always said to be advised by a lawyer or whatever, because all agents wanted to do was go to the house, win the instruction and list it and put it on Rightmove. They didn't want to do anything else at all. So all these other things that we started having to do were a nuisance, and it was slowing the process down. But as I saw the opportunity to say, well, we've got to do all this, we need to do it properly, but it gives us an opportunity to gain some competitive advantage. Then we get onto the business of these PIQ forms, and we hit the point where clients are filling these in, and then when you agree a sale, the lawyer sends them another form, which is the same. It's not the same, but it seems to the client as though it's the same. Well, we've already filled one of these in, so we don't want to fill another one in, or what a nuisance that is, or whatever. And you start to think, well, how can we avoid them having to do this twice? Then you get to think, well, hang on a minute, the lawyers are making them go through the anti-money laundering processes again, and we've already done this. So why does that have to be done again, and why does that have to take time? So it was how can we get to the point where the client only needs to do all of this once? Because if they only need to do it once, what will it do? Well, it'll speed up the process. And we worked out that quite often 2, 3, 4 weeks was wasted whilst the clients did things for the lawyers that they'd already done for us.
Yeah.
Because they didn't understand why they had to do them again, they didn't rush to do it.
Yeah.
So we thought that if we could gather all that together at the beginning, we could bring a bit more urgency into the process, and also by avoiding the duplication. And I'm always motivated by cost, but actually, we could do this as an estate agent. We could get through the anti-money laundering stuff. We could get the land registry docs, and so forth. And we could actually get it all at no cost, because if we could persuade the lawyers to do it all for us and share it with us, we didn't have to pay for it, and the lawyers always charge the clients disbursements for it anyway. So it was not costing the clients any more money. No disadvantage to the clients whatsoever.
Yep.
But less cost for the estate agent and squeezing time out of the process, and as well providing us as agents with all the information that we
was
wanted
a win-win.
to be able to give. We wanted to be able to stand with people at a viewing, and if they asked us a question, we wanted somebody to be there with the answer. And we also used something called Rummage 4, which to some extent isn't necessarily the point, but anybody could stand outside any of the properties that we had and link to that and get all the information that we had. We could provide them with all the information we had at that point.
So then we went to the lawyers, didn't we, in 2020, and put this to them, and they adopted that as a principle, and we launched this contract ready scheme. Well, going to launch in 2019, 2020, but something called COVID hit us, didn't it? But we did manage to launch it in July 2020, didn't we?
We did. We launched it, and in my mind, it worked really well. I wouldn't say that there weren't one or two hiccups along the line, because it hadn't been done before, really, in that way. But we managed to work through all the hiccups, and I'm absolutely certain that it certainly gathered all the information. It allowed us to deal with our anti-money laundering obligations quickly and more easily. It didn't involve us having to ask people to come into the office with a passport.
And this was using the Minerva platform as well.
It was. It was using the Minerva platform, using the AML checks done through that. And the advantage of those AML checks was that they were checks which were good enough for the lawyers. The stuff that we'd been doing as estate agents before wasn't quite up to the standards that the lawyers were required to do by the Law Society. So we just upped what we did, and because it was quick and easy, what we were doing was loads better than we'd been doing before. It wasn't really costing us anything, and it ticked the box for both us and the lawyers, so it didn't have to be done twice. So
you got at the end of that your PIQ, your Safe Harbour, Land Registry Safe Harbour Standard ID, and a copy of the title that the Land Registry had provided, which the lawyers were going to have to do anyway. So you got a copy of the title on every job, and that was running. And what sort of volumes did you do on that sort of post July?
Well, I think we were
2020.
I mean, we were putting probably 200 properties a month into that system.
Yeah, and we ran that for a good 18 months, didn't we?
We did.
Until you sold Ryder Dutton.
True, yes. Yes.
Post that, the new owners decided to go down a different route, but that's another story.
No, and say there were one or two hiccups. The problem with it was that we got it up and running very nicely, and then there was the post-COVID explosion where there were just far too many sales and far too many matters for lawyers to deal with. So even though we had a contract ready property and we agreed a sale, the lawyers didn't have the capacity to act, so it would still take them 3 or 4 weeks to send out a contract, because they just didn't have the capacity to
deal with what they were doing at that time.
And it wasn't anybody's fault, that really. It was
just the nature of things. So when you see all the stuff in the press today about upfront information, this is sort of like deja vu for you, and you've sort of been there and got the t-shirt a little bit, haven't you?
Well, I think so. I think we had formulated our own solution and implemented it. And what we were doing was, and this is 4 years ago or whatever, was good enough to comply with anything that anybody would be required to do to them. And we even found a way of sneaking all this information onto Rightmove. We used we had it all hosted by Rummage4, but we put a link on Rightmove for one of their video links, and just told people where to go, and all the information that anybody wanted about a property, all this stuff about flooding and broadband and all of this was all there. So we were fairly comfortable with what we were doing, and I honestly thought it was working really well and was going to be a good thing for us in the longer run.
Wasn't the other thing that it meant that you got the solicitors instructed when the house went on the market? There's a big debate about that now, but getting the solicitors instructed at that point removed a whole chunk of delay.
Well, it did, because the solicitors were being instructed at the point that the property went on sale. The clients were doing the AML stuff. They were filling in, all the questions that they needed to complete the PIQ and the TA6 at that time. So there were no delays. So, it's the term now is onboarding. How long does it take a solicitor to onboard a client? Well, you used to send them instructions. They used to write to them. They used to say, sign the terms of business, fill in these forms, come in with your passport, do this, that, and the other. And we got rid of all of that. So the lawyers were instructed on day one, and we were getting to the point with one or two of the lawyers where what they were also doing was looking at the land registry docs when they came in, and just quick review, nothing much, but quick review, let us know if they could foresee any problems, any difficulties, and so that anything could be tackled right at the beginning. And I say it was only really the fact that everybody just became completely swamped with too much work that we couldn't ever actually prove that we'd managed to shorten the time periods. And I'm sure we would have. Just
to show how far we went with that model, you included the searches in as well, didn't you? We changed the way the search model worked by putting searches in at an early stage, and the vendor was in effect instructing the searches.
So we did. So when the property went on sale, seller's lawyer ordered the searches in order to make the property contract ready, really, and there was just a clause in the contract saying that the buyer would pay for the searches on completion. And we had a few teething problems with that because some lawyers didn't like it, but at the end of the day, I think the sensible ones could just see that it was sensible. There was no reason not to accept the search that had been done. If the property didn't sell for too long, the searches were refreshed, so they didn't go out of date, so there wasn't any problem with that. We did need the assistance of a fairly helpful search provider to allow us to make that work in that way.
My name's no partner.
But it did work. It did.
Yeah. So, and I think you'll find that there are one or two models like that operating today. I know there's one going on in Sheffield. I haven't got Steve Hinchelwood on the show in 2 weeks' time, and he'll expand on how he's making that work in a very similar way. So here we are now, probably less than a month away from the Law Society saying that the lawyers need to use a new TA6 form that in effect should be filled in by solicitors, but by estate agents, by clients, when the property goes on the market. That's caused a bit of uproar in the legal community, but most law firms are just saying, well, if that's the way it's got to be, that's the way it's got to be. Let's get on with it and deal with it. And if it changes, fine. But in the meantime, come the 25th of June, we're going to be using the new TA6. So from your perspective, you would say very much adopt that, wouldn't you? And we don't have a PIQ anymore. We just have a TA6. Lawyers use it, client uses it, estate agents use it. It's got all the questions on you'd ever ask. I mean, probably too many questions, but it gives you everything you need. And that won't be the disaster that many think it is.
I don't think it'd be a disaster at all. I think it just, again, as these things do, it presents opportunities, really. I think that probably still somehow there will need to be a PIQ and a TA6, because I'm not entirely certain that you can really give to a prospective buyer all the information that a seller will fill in on a
it is. The new Tier 6 has been pretty vetted. You haven't probably seen this, Rich. It has been vetted by the Law Society. It's their form at the end of the day. And the new form, the version 5, there's nothing in it that you wouldn't want to give to a buyer. So it's all there.
Well, that's because that didn't used to be the case. I mean, I honestly think that there are lots of opportunities. I mean, fortunately, as an agent, we were big enough to put together our own solution, and our own solution to get all this information together, get all the properties contract ready, really cost us very, very little to do it. For agents that are a bit smaller, they might want somebody to do it for them. But for me, this is a massive opportunity for law firms to get together with agents and say, we can do this for you in return for the conveyancing business. And I just think there's a massive opportunity there. I think the opportunity now, this is possibly the first time when the opportunity has really been there for the lawyers rather than the estate agents. I think there is a huge opportunity now.
So do we, of course. So thanks very much. We've done 45 minutes. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for your time, Richard. I hope you'll join me again in the future on one of our stat shows when we can review the data that comes out of 20A and 20 Convey. We'll be back with you on the 29th of May, I believe, with Steve Hinchelwood from Taylor & Emmett in Sheffield. I would like to thank Richard once again for his time today and for his input, and I hopefully will see you all soon. Have a good weekend. Cheers. Bye-bye.